Okay. All right. Well, it is like 3 minutes after 7, so I think we can get rolling this. So once again, I want to welcome everybody here. This is Wild Ones of Southeast PA. We have a brief sort of pre-meeting before our feature presentation this evening, so we're going to run through the agenda quickly. As per our usual meeting, we open up and welcome all new members. We had a board meeting in December. We're going to go through a little bit of just chapter stuff, updates to the grant, talk about our spring bulk plant sale. We'll cover the tree of the month this year, invasive of the month, upcoming events and opportunities, and then we'll go right into our feature presentation. We'll have some time afterwards for open discussion, and then, you know, if you would like to hang out, we usually end up talking about native plants for a good 20 minutes to a half hour. Everybody's welcome to stick around. Sometimes that gets into the 9 o'clock hour. People get a little tired of sitting in front of their computer for 2 hours, so people tend to drop off a little bit.
Would you explain something of your technology in terms of knowing how we connect with you and what buttons press what?
So right now I'm in control. All really you can do is sit back and watch. You're welcome to join through the chat window down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That will allow you to communicate with us. And there are messages that pop up in the side. So if you see the bottom where it says chat.
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome to type in any questions you might have through the presentation. And, you know.
What's making people's images appear and disappear, though?
That is just their settings. So you're welcome to turn your video off. If you look at the bottom, there's audio video buttons to the left at the bottom of your screen. And you're welcome to hit either one of those buttons. As a matter of fact, I'm going to ask people to mute their mics when I have the presentation. So mics are at the bottom left-hand part of the black window that your screen should be on. Do you see it, Vera? You got it. She's muted. All right, you're good. And then if you don't want your video to show, you're welcome to hit that video button to the right of that, and that will black out your screen and you'll just have your name.
There was a lineup of faces at the top. Now I only see participants as names and initials, basically. What's the difference?
Nothing. It's just people, how they have their settings set. So some people, wish to have their video on. Not everybody keeps their videos on.
But I did see that at the top, and I no longer see it, and I didn't press anything to get rid of it. So
Vera, up.
Yes.
Up in the top right, it says view. I sound really loud. And where you click view, you can change how you see what you see on your screen.
Well, what is the right view for doing this?
So you can play with your settings however you want, but we probably should proceed with the meeting. As you get more familiar with Zoom, you'll see you can do different things with it, but right now it doesn't matter how the people are displayed as long as you can see the screen of the presentation.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So again, welcome everybody for our 5th year anniversary presentation. So we are celebrating 5 years here at Wild Ones. We've got Susan and I were trying to figure this out last night, and we figured we have put over 3,000 native plants into the ground at this point. So happy anniversary. We are currently sitting at 155 active members. We have new members from the main line and from New Jersey. Memberships include Pennington, New Jersey, Malvern, Bryn Mawr, and Ardmore, PA, and welcome Rebecca R. From Ardmore. We are looking for volunteers. We're always looking for volunteers. We encourage people to, reach out to us if they're interested in participating. We are looking for somebody to work at a tabling event here coming up in May. The Bucks County Watershed Masters Plant Sale is in Middletown Grange, and that will be May 10th of this year. If anybody's interested in tabling, please reach out to us at Wild Ones of SEPA. We also have updates to our grant program. We've updated the grant application. The grant application is available on our website. There are rolling deadlines. Applicants must be non-profitable charitable organizations or government entities. We also put certain conditions upon the grants that we give out. So we do not fund any purchase of any seeds that are treated with fungicides, insecticides, neonicotinoids, or other systemic insecticidal compounds. We also don't permit the use of herbicides, insecticides, or pesticides on the project whether for site preparation or for post-installation site maintenance. Last year, we presented $2,700 in grants to 3 separate organizations. If you look there at the bottom, the picture on your screen is the Bondsville Mill grant, and that is a garden that was planted with Wild Ones of SEPA funding. Coming up this year, we will be doing a bulk plant purchase. Again, there are some conditions for the bulk plant purchases. They can only be purchased for personal use. They can't be resold. If you're purchasing as part of your volunteer activities or donating the plants for a gardening project, this is okay. If you plan to resell plants or use them in your business, contact North Creek. It's to establish a business account. Plants may not be purchased through Wild Ones for resale or business use. Plants need to be ordered by Monday, March 3rd. Payments are due by the end of March, and pickup will be in April around the Plymouth meeting area. Plants, is there just one slide on this? Okay, or 2.
I think there are 2, Rick, but
Yeah.
just so people don't get all nervous about writing all this stuff down, an email will go out to members probably with the newsletter with a whole sheet of instructions that is what you see on your screen.
Right.
So don't worry about writing down what's on your screen. You'll receive it in an email.
Thank you, Susan. Non-members will be charged a 10% surcharge. Again, it's full flats only. It will be specific to the plants that are available on or before April 18th of this year. If it's not listed on the website as being available, then we can't order it because we're picking up those dates. We're having them delivered. So if they're not available by April 18th, they won't be available for the sale. Only native plants can be ordered. And again, orders will be submitted through wildonesofsepa@gmail.com. This is a few photos from last year's plant sale. So you can see Denise and Jesse there on the left. And how we sort of organized the flats last year for pickup. I had those red flags or orange flags with everybody's orders.
Rick, I thought all those were going to be planted at your house.
Oh, I wish.
Well, if you had to plant them all, that's 45 flats, I think. That's just an enormous number.
Truth be told, there's still some plants in the flats from last year that never got planted, but they're doing okay.
They overwinter.
Yeah, they do. Tree of the month. Judy, you want to, or Susan, would you like to talk about the tree of the month?
Sure. So this year, we're featuring different keystone trees. Keystone trees were identified by Dr. Doug Tallamy and others as particularly important for pollinators, not just for the pollen and the nectar, but also the leaves and other parts of the tree that produce food for the different stages of these native insects. Butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, wasps, all kinds of native insects. So the cherry genus Prunus is one of the keystone trees that were identified in Tallamy's work. And black cherry is a tree that you'll probably see if you have a wooded property or you go out and walk in the woods. This is a really common tree in southeastern Pennsylvania. And it's especially beautiful in the spring where the small white flowers just make drooping racemes of just a cloud of white, which is really great. It produces a lot of pollen. That's probably one of the benefits for the native insect species. The thing that always puzzles me is there isn't any scientific research yet about exactly which qualities of these keystone plants specifically benefit the native insects. Dr. Tallamy and his group just tallied insects on different groups of plants, and that's how they came to identify certain genuses and species as keystone plants. So we have to trust that their work is right, which I'm sure it was. And this being one of the valuable trees, if you can plant a black cherry or if you have them, it's a good tree to nurture. It's a full sun to part sun tree. It's very versatile, doesn't demand particular soil. I've got it growing in my property is mostly rock. I've got it growing in rock. It seems really versatile and adaptable. And grows in pretty much any way. Sometimes it's a multi-trunk tree, mostly it's a single trunk tree, but if it gets knocked over by a storm, you'll see sprouts come up. It's just, it's a robust, hardy tree, a really good one to have around, and it feeds a lot of pollinators. So there's our feature tree of the month.
If you have one, you probably have more that you don't know about. At least if you have one that fruits.
In a
But-
wooded property, right?
Yeah.
Any woods, any hedgerows, they will reseed.
Yeah.
Which is nice. And you can move them. They don't mind being transplanted.
And it's funny. I mean, mine get fruit, and the fruit is gone by the middle of summer. It just
Right.
disappears.
It doesn't even stick around.
Yeah.
It's one of the first to go. And you can see the robins in there, the blue jays, the thrashers, mockingbirds, lots of birds on those
And I
those
see, what is it,
cherries.
the cut leaf bees that cut out the semicircles. I see that evidence of cut leaf bees
Leaf cutters, good. Okay.
on them as well.
Yeah, so that's a use of the leaves that you wouldn't think about right off. The bee is not even eating the leaves. She's carrying it back to her nest and making a nest for the larva, but it still serves.
And then invasive species of the month, Multiflora Rose.
Yeah, the invasive species we feature are usually the result of me walking around my property dealing with invasives. So this is a really good time of year to root out invasive Multiflora Rose because you can see it. If you look at the photograph, a lot of times, especially the young shoots are red, and there's not a lot of red out there. Next month's invasive species is the other red one. But you can pick out Multiflora if it doesn't get you first. If you're walking in the woods and you get grabbed by some thorns, it could be Multiflora because the thorns are nasty. The interesting thing about this plant is that maybe 15 years ago, a virus called witch's broom, that's the common name, I don't know the scientific name, swept through, I think, the entire eastern seaboard and was particularly devastating to Multiflora Rose. The bad news is I lost my nice roses. The good news is it really whacked back huge thickets of Multiflora that were in the woods. They didn't die completely. They are coming back. But the nice thing is that the 10-foot tall and wide thickets have mostly, in my observation, been hit and demolished. And what's coming up now are root shoots, and they're so much easier to attack now. You take your pruners, you take a pair of medium-sized loppers, maybe you take a pruning saw out into your woods or your hedgerow or your meadow. They're coming up in the meadows too. And if you cut below the root crown, you have to dig a little soil away to get there. You will likely be successful in preventing this thorny shrub from regrowing in those areas. So it's a really nice opportunity right now to stop Multiflora from doing what it loves to do, which is become a huge thorny mess of a shrub that's really hard to get rid of.
And at one point in time, it was encouraged by the U.S. government, right?
It was planted as a highway median barrier, as a crash barrier on the edges of highways, as a hedge, for a hedgerow for farmers. It was planted at the edge of sheep fields so that the sheep wouldn't, trespass into the next field or fall off the cliff or whatever. Yeah, it was definitely, at one point in the 50s, it was promoted.
So, I mean, this is sort of what it looks like when it's in bloom. It is sort of multi-leaved stems, and then it's most notably they're noted for this little bit of, they call it a fringe steep leaf.
The stipule, right?
Stipule, right? Like, so you can see that on your screen with the circle there on the right. It sort of has little hairs that stick out at the bottom of the leaves where they come off the stems.
That's a really good picture. And you're probably not going to find native rose reseeding in your woods. So pretty much anything you find with those really sharp thorns that looks like a rose with the rose leaves on the left, it's a rose, and it's going to be Multiflora. So take it out.
And then the flowers don't look like traditional roses either. So they're just sort of white petaled flowers with yellow centers. And they're not terribly large. They're called multiflora because there's lots of small flowers versus like a rose that you would see on a native rose.
Well, the native rose flowers also are all pink. We have 3 native roses, and they're all much larger flowers, as you said, and they're pink.
I've got a Rosa Virginia that has yet to flower. I planted.
Oh, that'll be pretty.
And then just final thing we do list, and this will be in the newsletter. So you don't have to. Vera typed out how are multiflora dug out effectively, and a photo below the root crown would be useful. typically, they're sort of a bitch to dig out, honestly.
Well, don't dig them out. When you disturb a lot of soil, you're inviting every single weed seed in that soil to resprout. The better thing to do is to dig a little bit around the root crown with your hands, with your gloves, maybe with a trowel. You'll see the root crown. It's a huge bunch, and below it, the roots start coming out. Just whack each one of those roots, work right around in a circle around the plant. And when you've cut it all out, you're going to have a bunch in your hand of canes, whether they're alive or dead, and a thickening at the bottom, which is the root crown, and below that, tiny stubs of roots that you cut off. That's how it works. So don't dig the whole thing out. If you dig those roots out, you'll disturb more soil and make more work for yourself.
Cause another different issue.
Yeah, even if those roots resprout, which some invasives do and some don't, it's much easier to go back next year with your pruning saw and do the same thing again and not disturb the soil than to dig the whole thing out.
Thank you, Susan. So a bunch of things coming up. It's the time of year where there's not a whole lot you can do outside, but there's plenty of educational opportunities available. I think one of the things that I'm certainly interested, I am considering driving out to Reading for the community seed swap that I mailed everybody about last week or over the weekend, if you were a non-member. I'm tossed between doing that or the deer resistant seed propagation on the same day, January 25th. They're both on a Saturday and both in the morning. So I can't do both, but I might do one of them. Some stuff that's coming up in February. Again, you don't need to memorize this stuff. This will be out in the newsletter, which goes out to everybody on the mailing list. And then Audrey actually kind of reached out to us today and kind of gave us this. If you have children in college that are interested in kind of making a difference in their campus, this group is an advocacy program that's dedicated to eliminating chemicals and pesticide on college campuses, which I thought was a fairly noble cause and something that, I would encourage everybody to get behind. Next month, our meeting is on February 12th. We will be having another webinar. That webinar is Meadow Installation Insights by Emma Shad. She's the Habitat and Volunteer Manager at the Riverbend Environmental Education Center. And with that, that sort of brings us to our feature presentation. So I did want to comment, and this comes to us via the Brandywine Conservancy. So here, there's a little bit of history about the Brandywine Valley Conservancy. This presentation was created for their educational series, but we did get permission to share this presentation. And we have also made a generous donation to the Brandywine Conservancy for use of this program. So we didn't just rip it off the internet. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen, hang on, and start sharing this screen. And here we go.
Welcome everyone to Native Plants, Nativars, Cultivars, and Straight Species, What You Want to Know. Renee and I are very pleased to be able to bring this thought package to you today. We have both been working in native plant horticulture and ecological gardening for quite some time. And while we are thrilled to see the proliferation of or often repeated tidbits of information as they are facts when they are not in fact facts. We're hoping that this is going to highlight some of these things and also highlight some of the reasons for why picking cultivars at times is a smart choice, and where picking straight species would be a smart choice, and so on and so forth. The image that is behind this title page here was chosen from our marketing and development team.
I'm going to stop that for just a second. Do people have audio?
No,
Okay.
Yeah, and what we had was not good.
All right. Does anybody know how to fix that? Let me see here. That's all the way up.
I've
It
got
looks
mine all
like
the way up and I can hear it, but someone is not muted, Rick. Maybe you can, someone's not muted and I can hear talking in the background and someone's typing. So that's a bit distracting. But the audio was fine. It disappeared for half a minute and then it came back.
Usually there's an option when you're sharing your screen to also share the audio from that tab. I can't remember where it is, but that's usually when you're toggling that you need to share the audio from that tab and not just the video.
Rick, when you came back on your audio, I could hear it.
Yeah, I think that's because it was my audio was picking it up.
Okay.
Do people see the screen now? I just think I just hit that optimize button. So let me try this again.
And we had actually no input in it, but it's a fine choice to do
Is that
this
better?
because there are cultivars in this image. And this building
Yes.
that they are flanking the walkway to is our marketing and development building. All of our offices in there are the folks that work with those things, including our executive director and on down. Renee later in this talk is going to talk specifically about the plant that's here and talk about a little piece of her journey with gardening and show you the kinds of things that can happen and the kind of thought paths you might go down and how you will maybe want to correct them as you go. So let's start, excuse me, let's start with the basic definition of what native plants are. And I'm going to put it like this: plant species that have inhabited a particular region for many, many thousands of years. In our area, the last ice age occurred about 11,700 years ago. And from that time, the plants that are living in any one region that you go through in Eastern North America have been evolving from that time period. And the whole point of the evolution of them is for them to become better participants with the other creatures that they interact with, and to become more and more fit to live in the area that they're in. We're not going to talk about how this happens in evolution, but that is what happens. So that at any one point in time, you are looking at the plants that have survived many, many thousands of years worth of changes and of different conditions, weather patterns, and so on and so forth. These plants are the champions of everything that's come before them. Okay, let's go a little farther into cultivars. I'm going to call a cultivar a particular plant that a human selected and propagated, meaning reproduced, in a manner that retains all of that plant's unique and specific characteristics. I'm not going to talk about how right now, but let's put it this way. Most cultivars are genetically identical to the original plant. They are complete copies, or otherwise called clones, with all of the positive and negative attributes of the original individual that was selected. Now, any of you watching this who are gardening at all have probably shared plants with some of your gardening friends or family. And if you took an herbaceous plant and you split it in half with a spade or a shovel and you shared half of that plant with another party, you just effectively made a cultivar. You didn't probably name it, but you just did what happens in the world of selecting cultivars. If the people you shared that plant with 2 or 3 years down the line had really big plants and now they split that and they shared it with all of their friends, and that process continued to repeat, you would have a very accurate picture of what it means to have made a cultivar and shared it with the people around you. This has been going on for as long as mankind has been interacting with plants, which is about forever. And they started learning how to work with them for their benefit. Now, I say most cultivars here, we'll come to that in a little bit. Remember that. We're not going to go deeper right now. Now I'm going to do something which is probably going to seem funny at first, but to get people thinking about this from another angle, we're going to talk about a couple of cats that my wife Donna and I were blessed enough to live with for a few years. Neither one of these cats is still alive, but on your left is Sparks, on your right is Lacey. And it so happens that Lacey was Sparks' mom. Now, you might not think that she might have produced a cat that was entirely red, as was Sparks, but she did. And Sparks grew to be a third larger than Lacey was as an individual. While these two cats in this picture were sharing a similar interest, they could not have been more dissimilar in temperament and in markings, although Sparks was offspring from Lacey. Now, this isn't going to be shocking to anyone who's ever had pets, or it's not shocking if you think about your families and your friends' families and so forth. But often people drop this rationale altogether when they start thinking about plants. And that really shouldn't be the case because so much of it is really similar. Here's an example for you. These are Granny Smith apples in the front. There's sugar bee apples in the back. There's America's favorite apple on the left, so-called Macintosh. And over on the right are envy apples. Looks like in this picture, no one really envied the envy apples. They're all grabbing the Macintosh ones. But here's an example of something that everyone interacts with all the time. Apples basically are cultivars. They're named selections that orchardists made over the years because they found an apple tree that had apples with particular characteristics, and they wanted those characteristics for flavor, for marketing, for storage, whatever they might have selected them for. This is common in our food world, and no one would think of labeling this whole process wrong or inferior. You just accept it as being a choice that you have, right? So let's go further. Let's look at some plants now. In front of you is an early picture of a relatively young flowering dogwood. So it's a small flowering tree that everybody attending today has probably in your area. This is a young one, and it's well known for the white flowers. They're really bracts, B-R-A-C-T-S, but even horticulturists, we just call these flowers. This is really the flower section of the plant. White in Cornish, Florida is the dominant color, but pink forms show up. They have shown up for as long as there have been dogwoods, but there can be paler pink like this with the streaks that you see. They can be darker red like this one. This is normal in the gene pool. And all that happened to produce these things in the market was a person that was observant looked at these and said, wow, these are terrific, and I can sell these, or I want one in my garden, or whatever that was, their thought process was. How do we go about propagating them so I have exactly that characteristic? That's how that takes place. And then that protocol is figured out. And by the way, they both fruit. If you're thinking cultivars don't always act as fully functional plants, you would be wrong about that. All of those cultivars of flowering dogwood produce fruit, which is a hugely important tree in our area and probably every area that it's in. Let's shift and look at Eastern redbud. Here's a picture of one of the Cercis canadensis. It's actually two. There's another one over here. On the Brandywine's west side, on the riverside, the Brandywine is just to our right. You can see some Virginia bluebells and Mertensia blooming below, and there's a bunch more underneath. It's a nice color combination. Here's a different tree in a different location. pretty much the same flower color. This is a tree in the pea family, so the pea flowers, if you were to see a close-up, which I didn't include here, you would see peas on a tree is basically what it looks like, or pea-type flowers. Here's another one in a park close to me, and this flower color is pretty standard in the gene pool, but it is not the only color that shows up. In the foreground here, we had these plants for sale at one of our native plant sales one year. I believe the cultivar on the left foreground was Amethyst Falls, I think, but see more purpley. And then these pots were a cultivar called Appalachian Red. I didn't mean to do that, but this picture is of Appalachian Red in the landscape. This is on our campus too. So there's 3 of them. I don't know how often after I planted it, they're much larger now. But this neon pink, this hot glowing pink, is a naturally occurring color in the gene pool. These plants, Appalachian Red, were found growing along a road in Maryland by someone who, again, recognized that this was an important option or possibility for marketing, and for maybe they were just thinking about beautifying the world in a broader sense. But it occurred on its own out of the gene pool. It was Mother Nature doing what Mother Nature does. Some of you may be surprised to know that red buds can also have red leaves. This is a single leaf of one. Here's a Cercis canadensis. Burgundy hearts is the name for this. And whenever you see the full name for a plant, a full botanical name, the cultivar name, if it is a cultivar, will appear in single quotations. So this one would be Cercis canadensis, single quotes, Burgundy hearts. There are a number of purple-leaved cultivars in the trade. I don't know how many there are, but there's more than a couple. To my knowledge, this tree does not produce seeds. So it's a sterile, which could be an important thing for you in a landscape. There are people who claim that redbud trees are weeds because they seed themselves all over the place. You may not want that in your property. You might, but there's an option for choosing. You still have the rest of the functional attributes of redbuds. Let's look at another one. This is Monarda didyma in the cultivar I don't really remember, but Monarda didyma, or bee balm, is a plant that shows a fair bit of genetic variation. They don't produce a lot of seeds. They do enough for people to make selections out of the gene pool, but you can find these. They're almost never find a straight species in the trade. If you do, it's from a very small little nursery who's very determined about offering seed-grown Monardas, Monarda didyma. But here you have a color. There's a detail of close-up of one, the same one really. Monarda bee balm, Monarda didyma, varies widely in its resistance to powdery mildew. So usually, along with making a selection for color, the person selecting is also wanting a plant which shows a resistance to powdery mildew development on the foliage. That is another thing that you don't see by looking at the plant. You have to find that out by living with it and growing them out and trialing them or seeing how it works in a planting. But those are some of the criteria people select for. It's not just flower color. Here's one called Cambridge Scarlet. This one I remember. You can see how much more red it is than that one. That might have been raspberry wine. I just don't remember. Okay, let's go on and look at, how about Lobelia syphilitica, the blue lobelia. Great pollinator plant, especially for bumblebees. That bumble will actually crawl right inside that flower, and it is so widely held that Lobelia syphilitica co-evolved with bumblebees to the point where the flower shape mimics the shape of the bumblebee so well that it fits in there perfectly. If I showed you the cardinal flower, which is Lobelia cardinalis, I didn't do that in this, but the shape of the flower is completely different, narrow tube. There's no bumble in the world that's crawling inside a Lobelia cardinalis, a cardinal flower. But here with Lobelia syphilitica, the bumblebees are viewed as their primary pollinators. Typical flower color, although they don't always have this streaking in the bottom like you see here. Sometimes they're just solid blue. This is really the same plant. I don't know if you can all see this, but there is an ant right here, which is also checking the flower out, probably looking to see if it can get some nectar. It's the second time I've done that. Probably looking to see if it can get some nectar. When you start looking at these plants carefully, you always find more life going on in them than the bigger forms that are more obvious to pick up on. What is this? This happens often enough in Lobelia syphilica's gene pool. White flowers show up in a population. These aren't terribly long-lived. Lobelia syphilica as a plant isn't terribly long-lived, individual to individual. I don't know that there's anyone who selected white flowered lobelia as a cultivar. This particular plant that I photographed showed up on our campus. It's no longer alive. It probably lasted a few years. I've found other ones since that have shown up. So it's not terribly uncommon, but it's not the dominant expression for flowers in Lobelia syphilica, which is mostly blue. Here's one that will be interesting. This is wild columbine, Aquilegia canadensis. This is the one that we have in the east. You may be surprised to know that there's also a yellow flowered one. And this yellow flowered one is a cultivar in the market. It's called Aquilegia canadensis corbett, C-O-R-B-E-T-T. It was named that because it was discovered in Corbett, Maryland. And this particular plant, if you were to sow the seeds of this, you would get yellow flowered plants. That's not the way it usually works with cultivars. One might argue that this really shouldn't even be called a cultivar, although some of us in the trade have used the term seed cultivar to mean that when you buy Aquilegia canadensis corbett, when you buy a seed cultivar, you are buying seedling generated plants. They're not generated by cuttings or divisions or something like that. So this one is way more dominant in our area. This one is still in the gene pool, shows up, but it does come true from seeds. I'm going to stay away from talking about hybridizing between the two right now in the interest of time. Let's look at a woody plant. Here's a Clethra alnifolia hummingbird is the cultivar. This is summer sweet. This is a plant that is normally quite a bit larger. You can see it's alongside of a walk here. Terrific, fragrant white flowers, terrific pollinator plant. Hummingbird, I'll say, was selected because it was a little smaller and a little slower growing than a straight species, Clethra alnifolia. It does get to be about 4 to 5 feet eventually, but it's slower and it's smaller than the straight species are. Still, within that gene pool, pink flowers do show up, and they can be darker like this, they can be softer pink, and they're named and they're in the trade. One might well ask, do they produce the same kinds of nectar than the straight species or that hummingbird does? I don't know the answer to that question. You'd have to, any of us would have to look carefully to see you have pink flowered ones. It's a legitimate question, but just because it's pink flowered doesn't mean it doesn't. How about some woody plants that are bigger? Everyone knows American holly. It's such a widely used plant in the winter holidays. Everyone knows American holly is those kinds of spiny edged leaves and red fruit. But fewer people probably know that American holly also produces yellow fruit in the gene pool. And here you go. And this was not a result of manipulation. This was a result of the gene pool expressing itself in this way. These trees can get to be quite large. That dude standing next to that yellow berried American holly is over 6 feet 3 inches tall. That's a very big tree. And that is a yellow berried American holly. Totally legitimate in the gene pool, but a cultivar in the trade. And there are many other yellow flowered cultivars. This one is Ilex opaca xanthocarpa, for those that really must know. All right, now let's take some of those principles and look at a specific plant and show you some of the variations that can occur and do occur with Phlox paniculata. This is the garden phlox or the summer phlox. That's all of this plant in here. It is not the yellow flowered ox-eye or Heliopsis helianthoides that's in here. We're going to look at these guys. Notice right away, white flowers, darker pink, paler pink. Another view, look at this. Here's some in here that are quite a bit darker, lighter pink, even lighter pink yet, white. Let's go take a closer look at what some of those flowers look like, because you can't see the details in all of them from this distance. How about this one with white petals? Look at those color markings in towards the center. Kind of that corona of little magenta-y pink striations coming out from the center of the flower. Or how about this one with a variation? Still white petals overall, but a blush pink kind of flowing out from the center of the flower. I'll stop myself from getting too poetic here. How about these? Kind of a lavender pink with a tight zone in the center of the flower. Paler pink. Here, the zone, that central zone, starting to bleed out a little bit through the veins in the petals. Look at this one. It's hotter pink, and the central part is bigger. It almost looks like there's glowing, and like it has a glow all of its own to me. How about this one? Kind of different with the white edge on on one side of each petal. That's peculiar, but this could be the kind of thing that gets you really excited when you find it in your planting. Let's look at this one. This is a Phlox paniculata also. This is a cultivar called Gina, or Gianna, if you prefer to say it that way. Obviously, the eastern tiger swallowtail is finding reason to visit those flowers. How about the clear wing hummingbird moth up here in the upper right-hand corner that's also zooming in on the flowers and putting its proboscis in its drinking tube, its flexible mouth part that's like a drinking straw, which it's dipping into the flower and pulling the nectar out. This is a great pollinator plant. This is a cultivar. You heard that right. This is a cultivar. It's a great pollinator plant. People that grow Phlox paniculata Gina widely report that it has more pollinators on it than the straight species do. And they're all good as a straight species. They're also great nectar plants. That doesn't mean you can't get an individual who doesn't produce a lot of nectar. That happens in the gene pool. They're not all the same, right? Here with Phlox Gina, you can see that the flower heads, these flowers are characteristically smaller and denser and born in great numbers on the stems. That's a distinction that exists with this cultivar too. Does Phlox Gina produce seeds? I really don't know the answer to that question. Most of the other Phlox, all the other Phlox paniculata cultivars that I know of produce seeds, and those offspring do not look like the parent plant. They look like the gene pool that I started showing you to begin with, because that's what's in their genetics. It was only the individual selected out and propagated to have greater numbers. Here's two more I shot in a garden in Maine. No idea what they were called, but you can see they're not like any ones I showed you before. More genetic variation in the gene pool. Here's another one. I put this slide in here to show you that timing of flowering is also one of those variables, like so many others, that can show up in plants. These particular plants with that hot pink color, this is my personal garden at home, and it's surrounded by a bunch of other Phlox paniculata that were seedling origin. I put a couple of plants in that were straight species, and this is the kind of thing that showed up. This particular plant is later than all of the other ones every year. It's in its genetics to be later flowering than the others. The rest of them, you can only barely see around here with some remnants of pink and so forth. They're already moving into seed production and doing that as part of their life cycle. This plant isn't even close to that yet. That's the kind of thing that can show up in the gene pool and does all the time. And we're just looking at flowers now and timing of display. So back to where we started. That's all taking place within that one selection. All those details I showed you were not strictly from here, but this particular location was all straight species, all seedling variation showing up in one patch, which is what you will tend to get if you plant any Phlox paniculatum. Now, I think it's time for us to shift and start talking about some of the other aspects of using cultivars. And I'm going to use this as a springboard here. I just took this is a neighborhood near to me, and it has native plants in it. You can see the Eupatorium back here, which I suspect is either the cultivar Little Joe. It's a Eupatorium dubium, probably. It's a shorter Joe Pye weed than would be something like Eupatorium fistulosum. And that's all very cool. But up front here, this is kind of a failure if you want people to see what development you live in, if you want people to know where they've arrived. This is not great matchup with design choice of a plant's natural habit. They probably look great when they're flowering, those iris, but this brings us into thinking about making choices about the plants that you're using. And Renee is going to talk about this more as she gets into her section of this. And I think this is where I will stop.
Okay.
I stop sharing. Oh, where am I going to do that here? Oops. Stop sharing. All right, stop my share. Okay, Renee.
Okay, we're going to do a little switcheroo here, and I'm going to share my screen. And let's see, let's go to current slide.
There you go, you're in.
I'm still loading. There we go. Okay. And just FYI, I'm going to take myself off of screen view here. Oh, I may not be able to. Oh, sorry. Okay, so let's get started with this. So at the beginning of our presentation here, we were looking at this slide here, this title slide, with the Phlox subulata, also known as moss phlox or carpet phlox, readily found on hillsides or planted at bases of mailboxes. It's a wonderful ground cover. It's evergreen, very tough, tolerant, salt tolerant, sun tolerant, or soil tolerant. And it's very floriferous, lots of blooms in the spring. And here you can see two cultivars that we have at one of our buildings here on campus that the paler color, the paler lavender or paler blue is emerald blue, and the pinkish one is emerald pink. And in this situation, these were ideal for this kind of location. I'm hoping to share a couple of stories with you today on my discoveries of Phlox subulata and how I became to know this plant. Here's an up-close macro or very tight close look at the flowers themselves. Note the petals. And you see the pinking, the little indentation, the dent on the petals. That is a really unique feature. And here's one for your emerald pink, a very rich pink and very floriferous. Note the number of flowers. This will be significant when we take a look at natural habitat and straight species and what they do. So here's one of my first stories I want to share with you. This is my home. And first of all, I will apologize for the resolution of this photo. This is from way back when I was using different tech and not thinking about presentation and quality and image quality. So I hope you get the idea. This is a similar situation where I decided to put in Phlox subulata for its attributes. One, just a richness of color. The fact that it's an evergreen low ground cover, it's very drought tolerant. If you notice along here, I'm going to advance this a little bit. These are two pictures here of the same area at different times of the year. And one thing I should note for you is the main reason I chose this plant was the fact that it could tolerate a lot of heat and dry. This is a southeast facing area, and it really cooks. I have cracked clay in the summer. This concrete walkway really starts to bake, and I can actually feel the radiant heat through my shoes in the evening when I go out for mail. So I was thinking of prairie plants or plants that are more meadow adapted for these kind of extreme conditions with low nutrient soils and the hot and the dry, because I wasn't intending to do a lot of excess watering. I live in Chester County and I have a well, so I wanted to be very water conscious about what I was putting in. And the other thought was to, in the design, was to put something down that would be kind of evergreen or a green foil, green ground cover first, low, and then allow plants later in the year to come up through that for seasonal display and seasonal interest, getting more bang for my buck in a smaller space. And what you might be able to see with your eye here, actually, I'll point this out with the little cursor here. These are Echinacea pallida, or pale cone flower, very thin petals, very pale in color, deep rooted. It's a prairie plant, very tough. And they come up flawlessly through the phlox without disturbing the phlox and without outcompeting the phlox, which was really helpful. And I also put in, which is not blooming, but you can see here these little fuzzy leaves that are a little cluster of these here. These are Ruellia humilis. Wild petunia is one of the common names. They have a very, very big purple, pale purple flower in the summer, and they bloom for long periods of time. And these also sleep for a period of time. It's through dormancy, so that the phlox can come up, do the thing, bloom. And then when they kind of wane out, these awaken, come up through the phlox, and then the next phase. I like to echo colors in areas, and this is kind of the other thought process behind this design combination of things that I put it along this walkway. So from here, I wanted to jump into more of the natural habitat for Phlox subulata, the moss phlox. And in seeing it in its natural habitat, that really kind of informed me on plant selection, understanding that this plant lives in a very harsh environment. This is a serpentine barrens. This is a preserve, a natural lands preserve called Willis Brook Preserve. You can visit. And this is a great place to see phlox in all of its entirety as far as genetic expression. But I was taking cues from the plant community and from the plant environment here about why I would use Phlox subulata in that hot environment along the walkway. And if you're not familiar with serpentine, serpentine has soils that are extremely toxic to most plants, except for the ones that live there and have that adaptable traits to deal with the toxicity in the soil. Very rocky, they can be moist, but most often they're very dry. Full sun, and it's also an environment that has many other competitors happening at the same time. So I wanted to show you some of these images here at the preserve. This is a friend of mine standing close for kind of a scale, an image scale for this. And what I wanted to note here is that if you notice the tall stems, those are the flowering stems from the year before of a little blue stem grass, a native grass. So the phlox comes up, does its thing, blooms in the spring, provides a nice ground cover, kind of holds in moisture and whatnot, but also the next phase is for our warm season grass, the little blue stem, to come up and do its own thing too. So they share the space together, they're friends. And that's what got me thinking about the multi-layers at home and how I would apply that along the walkway there for additional color and additional interest. And here's another shot of this, about the same area, different year. And if you note in the background, that darker space, they have burned. And this area is really, or this kind of environment is really dependent on burns. It really helps beneficially for these plants to persist in this environment without having impacts with invasives and invaders. So tolerant, drought tolerant, and burn tolerant. But here's a better picture of the burn that's happening in the back. And I just wanted to note, I'm gonna take my cursor here. This area here, past the pine that you see here, is this. And this is about a year later, after the burn. This is what you see. Just to note, if you've never seen a burn and things recovering from a burn, within 1 to 2 weeks, you start to see greening happening. This is a quick response. The burn is actually extremely helpful for this ecotype. And it's not long before you see this kind of thing. They do rotate, just FYI, they do rotate areas that they burn to kind of help with the management of the space. And one that kind of gives a little reprieve to the plants and give them time to bulk up, get to mature size, throw seed, and also to help with the wildlife persistence in that location too, that depend on these. So within these natural spaces, this was eye-opening. I became aware of Phlox subulata through the garden centers, looking at the emerald blue, looking at the emerald pink, and all the other candy stripe and various cultivars that were available. When I got out here and started looking at these, it really made sense why those cultivars are selected. You get a wide range of variability in flower shape, flower color, markings, no markings, size, floriferousness. I did in general, I was just kind of noting between different serpentine locations that smaller the flowers are, the more floriferous they were, which is kind of fascinating. But here you can see two plants growing right next to each other in the same environment in their natural habitat, and they're vastly different in their expression, but they are the same in a sense. And here it is up close. And you can kind of see it, the one on the right is a little bit more pinky purple with a darker eye. And the one on the left has thinner petals, more of that pinking on the petal lip, and more of a pink, darker pink eye, pinker color to the flower itself. And then when I started looking around, I realized there's so much variability in all of these in this just one location. Most often, phlox have 5 petals and as their expression of their flower. But if you look within here, sorry, I'm wiggling my cursor too much. This blurred image here, this one up here, and this one over here, 6 petals. And I thought, wow, okay, maybe there's a possibility for something like that to happen as far as like the imagine a whole plant with 6 petals and how much of a display that would be. This is all in the same plant. So within the same plant, you're seeing different flower shapes, flower forms all together, which I found fascinating. And then we get into pinks that are really, thin petaled, darker eyes, very big pinking. And then you get into these lavenders and these blues with a really dark eye, but spaced out petals. They're not overlapping at all. Or a lighter marking towards the center, like we were seeing with some of the other Phlox paniculata that we saw earlier in Mark's section of the presentation. And then we get these fatties who would like big petals, a little bit of pinking. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. On the paler blue side, on the pinker side, the white ring towards the center. We get really good pinks, strong pinks, basic pinks. I wanted to point out here in this one pink flower right here, there's only 4 petals. And I thought, okay, well, they've got this gambit of how they can express themselves, and they're showing it within the same location. There's just like, I thought they'd be all the same, or at least somewhat, pretty close together as far as their conditions and what they would be expressing genetically, but that's out the window. Look at this. Even the darker eye here, that's a little bigger, that dark pink with some stripes coming in. Fascinating. I wonder if that's where Candy Stripe came from. And then you get pure whites, no other markings, big fatty petals, little overlap going on there. Or whites with a darker purple eye that really draws your eye towards the center, kind of like a nectaria guide for the pollinators. And a little chinking on the end, or pinking, sorry. And then what I wanted to get into this was also, as a gardener, we're all gardeners, or we all dabble, right? Mistakes are made, and the biggest thing from this is that lessons are learned, and you pick up and you try again. If you've killed something, you're not a gardener until you've killed something and you try again. I mean, that's like the base there. But for this is one of my mistakes, and I want to share with you because I'm really excited about it. I'm really happy with how it ended up turning out. I really fell in love with this plant. This is Rubus odoratus, a thornless raspberry native to Pennsylvania, all the way down the Appalachian Mountains and down towards Blue Ridge and the Great Smokies, and big magenta flowers in the summer. Lots of activity as far as pollinators. Bumbles love these things. Huge chunky leaves that are very bold, a lot like your hydrangea quercifolia, who really stand out in the landscape when you combine them with finer textured plants. And just an overall beautiful plant. I apologize, I don't have a habitat picture to show you, but where I first encountered this was in the Blue Ridge Mountains on a slope underneath, a canopy, pretty shaded, rocky soils, low nutrients, lots of dry, lots of root systems kind of competing. And I thought, this thing is fantastic. It was a couple of stems. It was about 3.5, 4 feet tall. And with these blooms in the summer, I thought that is fascinating. The bigger reason why I wanted to put this in is like, my husband and I are foodies. We love to have things on our property that provide food that we can snack and nibble on, and as well as provide habitat for wildlife too, and encourage insects, birds, all kinds of things, snakes, to come in and do their thing. So this is where the mistakes are made. This is the beginning, a long time ago, 20 plus years ago, started to develop my gardens. And I just wanted to note, keep in mind the far right side where you see the windows and the blank wall, there's nothing there. I decided to put the Rubus odoratus there outside the window, thinking it would be below the window height, and it might just be a nice shrub and very chunky, very bold texture there that would really stand out nicely, especially with the house. After about a year or two, this is what happened. It ate my house. And I was really determined that I didn't want to pick up and just toss this thing. Because here it was really difficult. I know it's hard in its dormant state, so it's really hard to see. We had trouble seeing out the windows. That's how big and full this was. Imagine those big leaves being like a full-on screen. So it got me thinking. I went back to where I saw it, where I experienced it in nature, and I realized where it was in a dry environment, very stressed in a sense that maybe it only had a few stems because the nutrients in the soil were very low, very rocky, very gritty, lots of root systems, shaded. And I thought, I think the one way I can have this is if I stress the crap out of this plant. So I picked it up and moved it, renovated the front yard. I am going to throw another photo in here in case you guys want to see more of the front yard. This is later fall. I was in the process of another reiteration of my front yard and changing my design, because that's what we do. We're designers, we're artists, we change things, we change our minds, and that's okay to do that. And eventually, this lovely plant, I picked up a root division that had roots and took it to the backyard where what you can't see in the photo on the right with the Cornus Florida or the flowering dogwood that's in fall color. There are a lot of trees around that have a lot of root systems. It's very dry. It's partly shaded. It doesn't get a lot of full sun. And I know the soils back there are not as rich. So I put it in, and this has behaved perfectly. She has bit in. She's doing well. She's producing flowers. She's starting to slowly expand in an area rather than in 1 or 2 years taking over the whole back. She's been pretty contained, and she does produce food for us, which is, the ultimate goal. Then I got a bonus. I was like, double whammy. Look at that foliage. That foliage is big and solid. It really helps to screen between myself and my neighbor. And with those white pines in the background, everybody knows white pines kind of over time, they limb themselves off and you can see underneath. And I thought, I don't want to continue to be looking at long. And I want to feel like I'm kind of in an enclosed wooded area as best I can make it in a backyard. And this is really performing a second function for me, is providing a really good screen. The third part about putting it in there, the decision was to think of a backup plan in case she does go wild, and which she didn't. But if she started to go too wild in this location, which she could, it wasn't a problem. Rather than having her come through the entire yard, I at least had the backup of, you see the lawn up front here, the green, I could mow her down. So if she started to creep her way through the lawn and start to get a little too far along, I could mow her down. They are easy enough to chunk off the edges and contain their size in this setting where they're more stressed. When they're not as stressed, it's a lot harder to contain. So this seemed to work out really well for us. And the front now has gone through its probably fourth change. And we now have a Magnolia macrophylla helping to shade the house, create a little bit of environment there so we're not cooking so much in the summer. And Joe Pye, or Eutrochium eupatorium, I think is immaculatum, has taken over that location. And yes, that does cover the window, but it actually makes viewing pleasure really nice when you're watching all of the bumbles and various butterflies meeting those flowers when they're at peak bloom. So it's really interesting viewpoint outside of that window there. And then while I was taking those photos, my neighbor's chicken, she adopted a roaming chicken, and her name's Nugget. Nugget decided to come over and check out what's going on. And Nugget has really benefited from a lot of the things we've done in her own garden here. She feasts on the insects. She goes through and scratches around looking for various foodstuffs, and she beds down or nests, roosts in some of the shrubbery we've put around our yard. So beyond wildlife, we have interesting animal life that comes in too. My biggest takeaway behind choosing cultivars versus species, nativars, is that I really wanted to put it out there that we are all designers. We're all creating various things. Your garden is your garden, your landscape, no matter how big or small, even if you're designing in a pot on a patio or a little porch, or you have acreage to play with. Anything you do and you put in, you're putting life into the ground, you're nurturing and you're stewarding this land, is going to be better than having macadam like this, where you occasionally have a visitor that comes in. This fritillary butterfly is gorgeous, but it can't sustain off this macadam here. It needs those living environments in which to persist, in which we can enjoy, but also participate in a helping hand with our natural environment. So definitely keep in mind when you're doing various things, whatever your goals are, and it could be all over the place, from seriously scaping to I need a minimalistic garden design, or I need something that's consistently showing color or having form and shape. Cultivars may be an answer for you. Straight species may also as well be it, if you're going in more of the direction of wanting to do ecological design, ecological gardening, supporting wildlife. There's a happy balance there, and you definitely can mix the two. Nobody says you can't. So have fun gardening, and thanks for listening. Mark, feel free to jump in when you're ready.
Okay, you need to, yep, and then I need to get back in
Go ahead.
and get to the right place, which would be here. Okay. And whoops. You can't see that yet, can you? Because
Just in slideshow.
I think if you click resume slideshow right underneath slideshow with the drop down arrow. Do you see that?
I don't have that. I think I saw that and didn't touch it, so
You were just there.
I'm gonna do this because we're gonna. Okay. All right, here we are. Got it. Okay, thank you, Renee. I hope that you all can see there's a person sharing, a person who's a seasoned professional in this area, sharing a little piece of her journey about using plants and figuring things out along the way and matching plants up to locations and how the locations will influence how they perform. There's a wealth of information in that short little story that she told about developing her front garden space. We haven't defined these terms yet, and these are part of our mission. So here's where I will say, a nativar is simply a cultivar of a native plant. Cultivar equals cultivated variety, nativar equals native cultivated variety. Nativar is a relatively newish term. When I first started learning horticulture, in fact, not until somewhat recently did the term nativar start to be abundant. It's really redundant. I mean, a cultivar is a cultivar. If someone made a cultivar from a plant in California that wasn't native here, it would be still native there. It could still be called a nativar out in that location. So I suppose if there's a benefit to the term being used with us, nativar means this is a cultivar of a plant which is native to our area. But it's not more mysterious than that. And what about straight species? Well, I had a bit of fun and I said, well, no, this is not an indicator of partner or
Mark,
gender preference.
Sorry to interrupt. The slides aren't advancing. I think it's because it's still in the sorter view. Trying to guide.
Not what I'm seeing. So where are you? You're still on nativars?
Yeah, it's the screen that I think that you saw that it says what are nativars. So if you want to just maybe use the arrow, or I don't know what you're seeing, but Yeah.
Let me try this.
There you go. Now it's, yeah, it's
Is
in
it there?
slideshow view. Yep, you can
Okay.
advance now.
So there
Mhm.
we were.
Thank you.
Now you've got it?
Yep.
Okay, so straight species is not a term which is an indication of a plant's partner or gender preference. Just a little bit of a joke there. This basically indicates all of the other individuals in a genetic pool who haven't been selected for commercial promotion. And if that seems a little bit wonky to understand, maybe this way will make more sense. There's something like the full cast of characters in a play who aren't having the spotlight shown on them. That's pretty much it. They're all the rest of the things that have not been selected that be promoted and talked about and produced in large numbers. Okay, it's that simple. It's very useful to refer to things this way, however. Is there more than this? Well, yes, sure there is. You could take any one of the things we've talked about and talk about it quite a bit longer and with quite a bit more passion and differing ideas and viewpoints. But we feel that what we've just presented is still functionally accurate, and it's useful information to take away to apply in your own journey of picking things and evaluating things, and not just repeating stuff that someone said who really wasn't informed well enough to see the bigger picture behind these terms. Nativars, cultivars, and straight species are just never simply good, bad, superior, or inferior. They are choices which offer different strengths and different weaknesses, as we've tried to show. Which ones are best suited for your interests and your goals on your property is your decision. And there's really not right or wrong. We can all be grateful that there are way more choices in the market today than ever before. And put a parting note, smile and have fun with the journey. There's lots to learn and a great deal of gratitude and joy to be derived from learning more about this and participating more in this. So I hope we have dispersed some of the mystery about some of these terms. I understand some of you may have more specific questions, and at Julia's discretion, we will see whether we can go into them or not.
Thanks, Mark and Renee.
Thank you.
All
You are
different
welcome.
perspectives. You've done an excellent job at just sharing information and different ways to think about natives and how they pertain to your personalized growing spaces. So thank you for that discussion. Yes, I was going to say, I always go to the chat first, but I think you've just been so thorough. Everybody's been so engaged. They're thinking on their questions if they perhaps have any. But there are some thank yous from folks. I do want to just mention before I go to the questions that I know some folks might have to hop off, but just a reminder that this is recorded. So you will receive a follow-up email with the recording, the survey, and any additional resources that we'll share. So thank you for attending to those who have to leave us now. There was one question that we'll bring up that I don't know the person's name, but it was submitted with the registration. They indicated that they were concerned that some plants have been treated with pesticides. They were looking for just some feedback on like labeling clues, or reliable guidelines to make sure that these plants or perhaps seeds they're purchasing have not been pre-treated or have any chemicals. It looks like they're looking to have really engage in organic practices. So yes, they were looking for tips on that.
Okay, so I'll jump in, Renee.
Okay.
And please add, with regard to the pesticides that are used on some plants, the big one that has caused a whole lot of disturbance, and rightly so, is the neonicotinoids that have been used in the production of plants, which really do persist with the plant. They're part of the plant for, I don't know if they ever outgrow them completely. I'm not sure about that part, but certainly by the time that you would buy them if they've been treated with them, they still have them and they're still toxic to bees particularly. To my knowledge, that's whether there's a disclosure about that is entirely voluntary on the part of the grower. If that's going to show up, it's going to show up in the places that are the biggest box stores that are selling plants that are marketed at the most massive numbers. It's not likely to show up in plants that have been grown by someone in your local area. I know in our area that North Creek Nursery, which is a large plug grower, has said they had stopped using all of them some time ago. I don't know that their marketing says that. It may. With regard to seeds, there are some seed treatments that enable better handling and sometimes better germinability, but there's no instance that I know of with a pesticide for seed treatment, which is potentially harmful later in the process. Renee, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, the only thing I was going to add to that is like, ask your grower if you're going to a nursery center or a garden center, ask them if they know. Sometimes they're actually ordering it from other places. They may not know, but just start with a question. And then also like find places that you know have more reputable habits and techniques that they use for growing their plants. We hear it for anyone when we germinate our seeds here. As far as I know, we don't do any treatment at all, Mark, do we?
Never.
No. Yeah.
Never.
All right, folks. Well, I'm going to shut it off there. I think that was very informative. Did everybody, enjoy that? Did people have questions? I mean, certainly we're not the experts here, but there's a lot of experience here on the line. So we'd be happy to talk about it. And this is sort of our open discussion time. I'd like to thank everybody. If you need to sign off, thank you for joining us. Again, I certainly would like to thank Mark and Renee. If they're not on here right now, but they may be watching in the future. We did, as a chapter, donate $200 to the Brandywine Conservancy for the use of this program, and sort of received authorization from Mark to share it with you. I also have a link to the actual video. So if there was stuff that you were watching or if you were interested in it, I can share the link in the chat. There's the link in the chat if you're interested. And right now, I guess we can open it up to questions. Anybody have any questions, comments?
Sorry, Judy. When he said the difference between cultivars and nativars, that made it sound like they were really the same thing, but we have always been told to try to buy straight species whenever possible.
Yeah, you know what? And I feel like, he probably could have made the video a lot shorter. If they would have just shared that. It seemed to take, quite a ways to get to that point where, we were all sort of asking, what's the difference? But he did get to it eventually. I think one of the things that they never touched on, this is always sort of a point of controversy, right? Are cultivars and nativars as good as straight species? I think, I'm sort of a purist, and I think there's plenty of purists on here as well, who would sort of side on the fact that, I prefer straight species.
Rick, I think what was interesting there, sorry, I'm going to put my mic on. I'm probably going to be heard better this way. I think what interested me relative to cultivars and straight species is that I just didn't understand how directly cultivars are related to straight species. In other words, a cultivar is just a straight species with a different color hair, or a shorter straight species than the average, or something like that. So it made me feel a lot better about owning a pink flowered dogwood, which I bought well before I understood how important natives were because my husband likes pink flower dogwoods. But now I understand that that's just a sport, so to speak, a fluke in the native dogwood population that could have happened in my yard if I had a lot of native dogwoods. It happened in my yard because I bought one, but it's not that it's any different than the white dogwoods that I also have in my yard. On the other hand, cultivars that are bred specifically to change a feature of the flowers, and we all know about, what's been done with cone flowers. They are doubles, they have puffs on puffs on puffs with the flowers. Sunflowers, some are bred specifically not to have pollen for the floral trade, because you don't want pollen on your table, I guess. Plants like that, which are also just cultivars that are selected for certain traits or not to have certain traits, that's different. And that's definitely going to have an impact on their value to native insects. Because sunflowers without pollen don't make seeds. What are the birds going to eat? What are the bees going to eat that go to sunflowers for the pollen? They're not going to eat anything. So that kind of cultivar development is definitely detrimental to our goal to keep things native and keep things beneficial for native insects. But something like a shorter summer sweet, which to some people is attractive because of their landscape needs, or a pink dogwood because you'd like one pink and a bunch of whites. For me, it feels better to purchase those cultivars if someone needs them, because it doesn't look to me as if they're disadvantaging the insects and the wildlife that those native plants have always supported. Now, there's one thing that I'm not sure Mark really focused on, which is leaf color, because some plants, think of ninebark, Physocarpus, is bred to have golden leaves. There's a bronze-leafed one. There's a red-leafed one. Physocarpus are really apparently easy to do that with, very amenable to that kind of tweaking. And research is starting to show that the insects that do things with Physocarpus leaves, not all insects do, but let's see, a leafcutter bee was your example earlier, uses Physocarpus leaf to cut her little leaf circle for her nest. Or larvae may eat Physocarpus leaves. They don't recognize the red leaf or the golden leaf or the bronze leaf as the same thing. For them, it just doesn't register as something that they can use, and they go right by it. So that particular plant is now not serving the native insects that it normally would serve. And so that's creating a different kind of problem. So I think we have to be a lot more intentional about what we do and a lot more careful about which cultivars we choose if we choose them, and not just say, oh, cultivars are something that happens in nature, so they must all be okay. Because
Does anyone know a source for that kind of information?
no, we're making, I
Yeah.
don't want to say we're making it up. There's not one source, Marilyn. I've gleaned this from looking in various places and learning, like on this video, more about cultivars and straight species. But there is research out there about the leaf color. If you Google it, I don't know how you would do, but you'll come across research looking at the impact on native insects of different colored leaves in cultivars. Definitely there's stuff out there about the impact of the flower shapes.
There's
If pollinators.
There's a whole new, the Dirvilla lonicera has a whole bunch of new leaf colors. And
This is
I
true.
would
Yeah.
love to know if it's still beneficial to the pollinators.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think you have to ask, what are the Dirvilla leaves used for? As far as I can tell, deer eat them. That's why they're called Dirvilla. At least deer in
It's
my
spelled differently.
deer in my yard eat them. But I think you'd have to observe in your yard what the Dirvilla does, what insects are doing with it before you could really draw that conclusion, unless there's research out there. And I don't think there's a lot of research out there yet. There's been some research on flower shapes and pollen and a little bit on this leaf color thing in certain species, and not a ton else. And Mount Cuba did a study, as you know, with phlox and echinacea, and they determined that Phloxgina, which is a cultivar that was developed for a particular color of bloom, and I think he also said less susceptibility to powdery mildew, maybe. Gina actually attracted more pollinators, but that doesn't tell us everything, because as we know, pollen has different qualities. Some of it is more nutritious, richer in fats, higher in proteins, amino acids. I don't think the research has delved into the pollen to that degree. It may do at some point. Right now, just because more insects flock to Aegina doesn't necessarily mean it's a better phlox than a white phlox or a pink-eyed phlox or, you know, any other color phlox. There just isn't enough out there. So if there's not information, we don't know. We just have to play it by ear. And as Rick said, if you want to play it safe and prefer straight species, that's always been the proven by insects, you know, beloved of all insects.
It's a
Mikey
safe
likes
bet,
it.
right?
It's the safe bet. Mikey likes it. Yeah.
So just comments from the meeting chat. So Katie chimed in and said, I think cultivars get vilified way more than they should. Yes, some are not as beneficial to wildlife as straight species, but a native cultivar is still better than an invasive species. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Can I say something?
Sure, Cindy.
I'm a biologist and I went to the Millersville conference and there was a guy there. I think his name is Jared Fowler. He did research, I think for his PhD or postdoc, and he found he did like maybe 6 or 8 cultivars of one plant, and he measured all the insects that came to those plants. So he could see the difference in what insects came to what plants. And it was really fascinating because even though, let's say, Gina, you know, you got more butterflies, but there would be maybe another one. And I'm not saying this is just an example. Another one might attract long-tongued bees. And so he counted all this, he quantitated it. And so what all of the scientists sitting in the room went, aha, like now we got to start looking at this because, you know, biology is very complicated. You know that. And so you could have multiple cultivars attracting different insects. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's not what you might want to attract.
That's a great point, Cindy, right? Like, so diversity is the key, right? Like, so just because it's different doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have a purpose.
Exactly.
So, you know, and that actually was sort of hits to what some people have said in the chat. You know, Patrick added, it's never black and white, right? Like, you know, we can't just put something and say, you know, straight species good, nativars bad. I agree. Deborah added, you don't know what has changed in a cultivar unless it's tested. Growers don't usually test them. Maybe they smell differently. Now Cuba has tested some cultivars, which, you know, they've done some great studies specifically on the phlox front, right? Like, I haven't seen a whole lot of studies for other plants out of Mount Cuba. That doesn't
Echinacea.
out there. Echinacea too.
They do
Oh, they have
echinacea.
a whole lot. You go on their website, they have
Yeah.
everything that you can imagine that they're testing.
I can't believe I've made it this far in the native plant group and I've never been to Mount Cuba.
Well, you need to go. I went to school there, so
Nice.
and Renee was one of my teachers.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. So
Nice.
yeah, it's a wonderful place. I went to a symposium on Friday, and there was a guy that talked about carex and all these different carexes and different cultivars, and you know, he had information. It's all in their publications that are online, so you can go online and look. Every study that they have done so far is on there.
I have read their carex study. It's very in-depth.
Yeah, and they're still doing it.
Karen makes a good point. She said terminology. Cultivars are not bred, they are selected. Which is true, right? So they're
Not always.
They are bred if you cross-pollinate plant 1 with plant 2 and you come up with something else. That's a cultivar.
Not merely a cultivar then.
Nature does that on its own. That's how they happen. But you can also do it in the garden.
Well, if we did it, it's not a cultivar anymore.
Sorry, if we did it, why is it not a cultivar if we do it?
That wouldn't be called a cultivar.
No.
Okay, well, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not gonna,
Well, no.
I'm a
The
biologist.
Okay.
cultivar is a selection of a native plant. That's all it is.
Exactly.
but
And you
nature can
either have
select it.
seed
Okay.
grown, or you can have vegetatively grown, right? Or just cutting off a branch or splitting it. But there are cultivars that come true from seed.
I thought that was interesting. I had the
Yeah.
misconception that a cultivar would not come true from seed, but it's a hybrid that doesn't come through from seed.
And I thought it was interesting when she did like the sublata, like when she saw the different sublata, the phlox sublatas
Mhm.
growing in the wild that were different varieties of phlox, completely adjacent to each other.
That was
Right?
cool.
Yeah,
Right.
thought that was very interesting.
I had no idea nature did that. I also have never seen phlox subulata in the wild, so that was pretty
Nor have
nice
I.
too.
I wish I did. Deborah
Yeah.
points out that National Wildlands has taken a stance that straight species should be used. I did not know that was National's stance.
Oh yeah, they came out with that a couple years ago.
Okay.
A lot of their philosophy is about restoration. So
Okay.
if you're doing something where things are, you want to breed and you want to have a lot of different plants come into, like, say, a park where you have a ton of acreage and you need to split, you need to populate that with a natural species. You don't want to use cultivars if you can. I mean, a lot of times the cultivars are all breed with each other and you just get another plant out of the deal. But
So like in the
Yeah, but a
case of,
cultivar doesn't know it's a cultivar.
exactly.
right.
It's
Right. I
just
mean,
going
so
to
in
go
the case,
out there and it's going to respond to the environment that it's in, and it's going to, its genes are still going to, they change in the next generation.
Right, American Holly does that. I think there's a study, and I wish I remembered where it was. Someone looking at American Holly in quote in the wild and discovering that genetically most of them have some elements of, I guess you would call them either hybrids or cultivar hollies. I mean, because American Holly has to, Cedar Hill and all those different American hollies that were bred for berry color, berry shape, berry proliferation, leaf color, leaf shape. I would like to see the results of her study because I only heard the reports of it ongoing. But as you said, Karen, these American hollies, the cultivars, they just are going to breed like everybody else. And holly is a really great reseeder.
But they're going to evolve over time. They're going to respond to their environmental pressures.
Yeah.
so I mean, is
But
the term nativar or cultivar even valuable, right? I mean, should we just call things natural variations of straight species? Because that's really what they are, right? As long as we're not the ones that are controlling the
Right.
genetics
We
of
didn't
it.
control them.
Well,
We just
It
selected.
might be easier to understand.
but you don't want to have clones all over the world and then push out all the straight species.
no genetic diversity.
Yeah,
Right.
you don't want that. You need to have that genetic diversity.
Right, but if
And
it's,
as Mark pointed out, sometimes cultivars don't reseed at all, that they end up being sterile. And so that's a
right.
loss of
Right.
genetic diversity.
Right. But that happens with straight species too.
Does it?
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of straight, like, there's plenty of plants in a population of straight species that are sterile because maybe they just don't attract a pollinator.
Oh.
Right. They have to be pollinated.
What's that?
They have to be pollinated. They need to be pollinated for the seeds to be
Yes, exactly.
Right. Either self-pollinated if
viable.
that's the way they are, or
Yeah.
another plant if
Unless
they're
they're wind pollinated, that's a whole
pollination.
different story, but most flowers are not.
So much to learn.
It is that.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
So Katie, she and I have been chatting through much of this presentation. She works for Briarbush in Abington, which is the nature center, and they have a program for adults, and they're also having a trip to Mount Cuba. So I think I might join them She did post a link to their events, and she said she will reach out to us to put their events on our newsletter and in our chapter updates.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. I really want to thank everybody. This was a great conversation, lively conversation. If you feel like hanging out and talking native plants, as a group, we plan on doing more in-person events. We've been somewhat limited because of COVID during our foundation years. We have a tough time getting people to kind of come out to in-person events, but we have a couple garden tours planned this year in the spring and summer. We're also looking to tie some things in with nationals, upcoming events in the fall. I think October, November, December will probably be, our chapter will work with national on the monthly presentations for those months. Anybody have any open items that they want to discuss? You're welcome to bring things up now. Anything native plant related, anything group related, anything fun plans for the summer? Is everybody seeding? I've got toadshade wildflower seeds here, ready to start winter sowing. I'm a little behind. I usually do that between Christmas and New Year's.
Oh, yeah.
And I started a new job. Luckily, everything that I have is sort of 8 weeks or 4-week cold stratification, so I think I still have time. I made the mistake of putting stuff in my breezeway, sort of just in loose containers. And I have a mouse that has kind of devastated my saved seed.
I hate varmints. Oh my gosh. Mousetrap
Do
time.
you
Marie,
put
have
all
you-
of these in a shaded area? Your seeds?
Do I put them in a shaded area?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're, and they should be protected, right?
Yes.
No, we're talking about winter sowing? No.
Yeah.
Oh no, I
Nope.
thought you just meant my seeds, like my seeds to be winter sowed.
Oh, you mean like in the
My
refrigerator?
seed
or
storage.
something.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
seed storage is in a dark area, but when I
Dark,
winter
dry.
sow, I put my containers just out by the side of the house. They're somewhat protected from wind,
Yeah,
so that they don't dry out, and then I've got to water them from time to time. But they get all the rain, snow.
Sleet. Today it was sleet. Yep.
you had sleet,
Yeah. Some particles of it. It's all water to the
salt
plants.
water, it's all good.
As long as we have water, if we have another drought, I'm going to resign. I can't deal with it. The watering
Resign
drove
to
me
what?
nuts. Everything, gardening, which I can't deal with, but it was just so discouraging. I had hundreds and hundreds of plugs in the ground from the spring, and then I had to go water them all because you can't lose them after all that effort. You just can't.
So dry.
We have a native plant demonstration garden, which is pretty sizable. And I watered it I started it the year of COVID, and I watered it maybe 4 or 5 times until last year, 4 or 5 times total. Last year, I had to water it like probably 10 times. And most of it was because I had a lot of new things like trees and shrubs that had to be watered.
But you know what? Even the established stuff this summer I watered.
Yeah.
Because they were talking about broadleaf evergreens literally not having enough reservoir to get through the winter, and I'm not losing my hollies. That was rough.
Oh, you lost so many leaves.
Yeah, that's a bad sign when an evergreen loses leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're hurting.
Yeah.
And we still don't have enough soil moisture, I don't think.
No, we don't. We're still in a drought.
We're still way low.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Rick. Winter sowing, usually I love to do it. I've got, usually 20 pots out there. I'm nervous about it this year because I don't want to go through another year like last year when I have hundreds of plugs that I need to support because I won't lose them.
It's
So
definitely
your seeds, you can keep them in the refrigerator and they'll be fine, mostly. If you don't sow them this winter.
No. Oh, wow.
Depends on the seed.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
Yeah.
wouldn't it make sense just to go in and sow them and see what happens?
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is when they come up and then I have to do something with them, I have hundreds of plugs that I then can't plant because I didn't plant all summer because it was so dry. So then I'm frantically
need a
planting
tabling event, Susan.
that 1 week in the fall when it rained, and then I had to water for the rest of the fall because it didn't rain. It was just awful.
My opinion is I'd rather lose like $20 worth of seeds than like $200 worth of plugs.
Well, that, yeah.
Right? Like,
after
so
the
I don't
fact,
mind
that's,
winter sowing and putting, you know, a $3 packet of seed in the ground and losing it. What really kills me is if I go to like Redbud Nursery and spend $10 on a plant that
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep, agreed completely. That's what made it so hard.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I had 600 feet of hose until I strung it all the way up my driveway, and I do.
Wow.
So,
600
yeah,
feet. Wow.
600 freaking feet of high. I took all the old hose, you know, the old stuff that you just throw out the back because then you got nice new hose. Nope, I resurrected it all. That's I didn't have enough water pressure to get all the way up the driveway with 600 feet of hose. I had to do my best. It was really not a good year.
Mm.
I was looking through emails, and we get a lot of emails, as you might imagine. Like Susan does a great job of keeping track of them, but I was
Oh, we
looking
get so many emails.
for volunteer opportunities. So I know we had the volunteer opportunity for that event right before Mother's Day for the Bucks County native plant sale. Can you guys think of anything else that I was missing for volunteer opportunities that we've discussed?
Oh, Media Borough always invites us to their events. Phoenixville always invites us to Phoenixville Green Day. We just never have any volunteers.
I know we need to
Yeah.
start tabling more events. I think, you know,
If we had volunteers, yeah.
to get the word out.
There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of native plant groups that are out there that go to these things too, like the Audubon Society and the women.
Brandywine.
Brandywine,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
it depends on where you live, you know, but there's a lot of groups. So you can be at a place and everybody has the same information and you're like, why'd I do this?
That's true. And it's
That's
speaking
the point.
to the choir, right? Like if you're going to a native plant sale, they either know about us or know the benefits of native plants. You know, where we really need to be is I think where people don't know the benefits.
Well, things like Phoenixville Green Day or media sustainability, people have some interest, but they possibly don't know, which is why they're coming
Earth Day
to the
events.
event. Yeah. Earth Day, right? Yep, if we could do that.
And all the native plant sales happen in like early May, right? Like, so they all kind of over like.
Yeah, it's a feast
It really is.
for 1 month. And then if it doesn't rain, it's famine.
All right. Well, I hope to see more people in person in live events. I think the first live thing we have is Judy's garden tour, Judy and George's garden tour in
May.
May.
Yep.
What day of May is it? Do you know?
It'll be in the newsletter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, if Judy's on, she knows. It'll be in the newsletter. I want to make sure Judy's good with the date before I announce anything.
Okay.
Judy, have you?
We're pretty easy about dates.
Are you still here, Judy? Because I think the
Yeah,
board's.
I'm here. I
Oh,
signed
okay.
me off, but I'm here under George.
Hey, George.
Oh,
Hi, George.
George's.
Yeah. We're on his computer and we have it turned over to the TV so we can see it over there. But I'm actually sitting at the computer now. I just had the video off. But I'm waving.
Okay. Hi.
Hi,
Yeah,
Jim.
I'm hoping it's late enough that, you know, things will actually, that, you know, hopefully we will have had some rain and things will have come up, but I'm going to start watering in April. I don't know how things survived the winter, obviously, or anything yet, but the drought didn't do us a lot of good, of course. I'm just hoping everything got the roots in well enough that they'll come back without too much watering. Ha, 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 ha.
All right. And as I mentioned, next month we are doing Meadow, right?
Yes.
Meadow installation insights.
That should be fascinating. I can't wait
Yeah.
for that.
I'm looking forward to that one too. And I'm looking forward to having a live speaker. I apologize for the sound issues earlier. I didn't realize there was a button I had to push. I hope that my fixing it resolved it.
Yeah.